Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and this evening, while I have a little bit of free time, I'd like to address a question that sometimes I ask myself on behalf of students, and I'm sure that it's in the mind of many um, as they consider education and which courses they should study, what subjects they should study, and so on. When we consider what the admission requirements are for modern colleges, modern universities, modern employment, whatever your destination might be, the question will likely come up, what in the world is the benefit of studying these classical studies, these 7 liberal arts or classical philosophy, all of these different courses that are available in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. What's the real benefit of these courses? And I know that there are many people who will, the homeschool conference speakers will start with all of their, babbling about the pursuit of wisdom and learning for its own sake and all this nonsense, which none of them do, by the way. They just talk about it. But that's really not the right answer to these questions. And I wouldn't want anyone walking around with that kind of, baloney in their mind as to why we should pursue these studies. It's true. It's completely true that no one needs to study classical Greek. No one needs to study classical reasoning or rhetoric or moral philosophy or natural philosophy, classical mathematics, and so on. No one needs to study these courses to gain admission to the best universities in the world, nor would that be a reasonable motive. And I wouldn't want any of my students to be thinking that they need to study these subjects so that they can gain admission to college or get a job. That's really not the motive. There's another question that needs to be asked, and this is where we find the answer to our question about these studies. That getting admission is really not a big deal. Our society loves to talk about admission. It loves to talk about applying to schools or applying for jobs and getting admitted, and we love to hear stories about how this student was admitted to Princeton and this student was admitted to Oxford or Harvard or what. And these stories are dramatized and people make a big deal about them, but they're really not that important because there's many different ways into desired ends in life. There's many different ways in. There's many different programs, many different options, many different opportunities. And this idea that when you're 18 years old, you submit an application and either get admitted or denied, and then that's that, is really an overly simplified and false, it's false view of how adult life and academics and professional life works. It's much more complicated. There are many more opportunities than most people realize, and those opportunities depend on certain skills, certain other factors that an initial admission to a college program or even offer of employment take into consideration or care about. First of all, it's one thing to gain admission to an institution. It's one thing to gain admission. It's another thing to succeed. Succeeding in an institution or succeeding in a certain field, succeeding in a certain line of work is very different from admission. Many people get admitted and then fail after being admitted, or they underachieve and they really don't take advantage of the opportunities. They really don't produce anything valuable. And so I would argue that the real reason why students of all ages, not just high school age students or anything like that. But the reason why I believe students should take classical Catholic studies seriously is because once admission is received, the question becomes, will we be successful? And success is even more important in the long run than admission. You know, for example, one can get admitted into a certain school or program and then struggle in that program. If it's an academic program, they can struggle to receive good grades. And then what do they have in the end? They've got an average degree or diploma. They have no real references or recommendations. They have no achievements or honors or awards. They just have the minimal end result, which is the degree or the diploma or certificate or whatever. And this really ends up not being very valuable. What we have to consider is not just how we'll get in or how we'll get our foot in the door of a certain institution or a certain field, but how we would actually succeed once we're in. And this is what I think many people don't spend enough time thinking about. The classical Catholic curriculum gives students knowledge, a framework of mind, a certain discipline and understanding of study habits, of a quality of intellectual activity that enables them to have success as the challenges, as the difficulties of academic work or professional work increase over time. As the challenges increase, students who have a classical Catholic education, students who continue to cultivate a classical Catholic education, they continue to grow and rise to the occasion. They can enter into more challenging studies. They can enter into more complicated issues because the wisdom that they gain through their classical Catholic studies will equip them to enter into more and more mature subjects, deliberations, problem-solving challenges, and so on. And so the question is not how do we equip our children to gain admission to college or a certain university, because that's really a question that could be answered in 1,000 different ways. Public schools can send children to Ivy League colleges, so an extraordinary preparatory education is not necessary for college admission. That's not the appropriate end of an extraordinary education. The question is whether our students, whether our children, let's talk about this as parents, whether our children gain admission to the ideal institution or not. First of all, that's not the end of the story, because they can always get started somewhere else and transfer or upgrade, get an undergraduate degree from one school, and then move up and pursue graduate studies at a better school. So there's many more opportunities for them to fulfill lofty goals and pursue high standards. But what it's ultimately going to come down to is success. It's going to come down to the ability to actually do successful work in those fields of study, in those environments. And the education that prepares a student for admission is not sufficient as an education that prepares a student for success in that institution. And that's an important consideration that I think we overlook. Now, I think that what I'm talking about here is, in a way, a false dilemma that we would never actually have to deal with, because I would argue that if we prepare a student with an excellent education an education that prepares him not just for admission, but for success. If we focus on success rather than admission, we will have admission too. So I think that this is the right frame of mind, how these things should be thought about. We should be thinking about what can we provide our children with that would help them to succeed in their future endeavors, to succeed in academic work, to succeed in a university environment, to succeed in researching and writing and problem solving and in starting and running businesses and so on. What kind of skills, what kind of knowledge would help them succeed in those areas? And if we work at that, and if we accomplish that, admission will take care of itself, and we won't need to worry about that. So this decision between satisfying requirements for admission as opposed to pursuing standards for success, it's really a false dilemma. No one would ever have to deal with that. Now, the problem is that many students mature at a time in their lives and sort of come to their senses when they've already missed some opportunities. I was an example of this. When I was 16, 17, 18, I really had no idea what was going on. I had no idea what school was about. I had no idea how anything worked. I grew up in a family where no one studied or went to school. And so it wasn't until I was 19 or 20 years old where I started to learn how things worked. And I was already behind my generation. I was already, steps behind. But once I figured it out, I was able to get myself in position, catch up to my peers, and excel past them. But it was because I pursued this kind of learning and thinking and discipline and culture that allowed me to succeed. And I had to use lots of backdoor options for how to get myself into places I wanted to get into, because I had missed the normal route, the normal opportunity to get into those places. I had to find alternative ways to get in. And to this day, I've always found that and I tell my students this all the time, if you do the real work, the people who matter in the fields that you work in, the people who matter will understand that you do the real work, and they'll reward you. The most important thing is to do the real work, not to fool around with all the nonsense, not to do all the fake, appearances and jump through all the rings. But those who do the real work, they already have the real thing. I tell my students, if you study, if you read, if you memorize, if you write, if you pursue real academic work, all the paperwork will take care of itself. Do the real work. Do what's in your control. Do the real work. And then we'll take care of the paperwork later. I've found that to be true in every area of my life. If I just do the real work, the opportunities come to me to do the things that I want to do. And I try as hard as I can to communicate that to parents and students. Some kids are going to mature after they've already missed initial windows of opportunity. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because our society as a whole is so slow and so irresponsible and so weak that even if you do get your act together at a later date, there's always plenty of time. And life is so long. We get this idea that we've got a few years and then it's too late. It's just so ridiculous. If you didn't get a college degree until you were 50 years old, and the average lifespan, let's say the average work years go through mid to late 60s, you would have 15 to 20 years to enjoy the accomplishment or the goal that you set out to achieve. To pretend that it's not worth it is really stupid. It certainly is worth it. It's like saying it's not worth running a marathon because you only get to enjoy victory at the very end. And therefore, since you only get to enjoy victory at the very end, why go through this long process of running for all of these hours and 26 miles when really you're only going to get to enjoy the fruit at the very... What a stupid argument that would be. And the same is true for any goal that we have. If we have a meaningful goal in life that we'd like to achieve, the idea that it's not worth pursuing it because we missed the first opportunity is really just an excuse to not pursue it. And we've got to be careful of that kind of excuse making ourselves, but we've also got to make sure that we don't encourage that kind of excuse making in our kids by having them think there's one way, there's one opportunity, and you missed it, so now you're relegated, to the B team or to the JV team, and that's it. Your fate is sealed. You missed your chance. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. So the real reason for these studies, the real reason is because while a person can get a job or gain admission to a school without any of these studies, and that's all perfectly true, they won't necessarily succeed after they've gained admission. And in order to succeed, in order to do great work, in order to be successful, in order to get good grades, in order to write well and get off to a good start, in order to impress people who are influential in making decisions about our future, there's a different level of learning and discipline, of intellectual subtlety that needs to be not necessarily mastered, because this is something that develops through life, but it's something that we've got to be familiar with, and we've got to have already started and be growing in this area. We've got to have things in place. We've got to have our roots in the water, as it were, so that when the intensity of the real life work comes upon us, we've got the resources at our disposal to be able to withstand, to keep this tree illustration going, to be able to withstand the heat of that work. And that's really what's necessary for success. Like with my kids, I don't put pressure on my kids with college admission. I think it causes more trouble than it does good. But I teach my kids that you should get started in college and get good grades. And if you get good grades, then you can transfer anywhere you want. You can always transfer upwards as long as you're getting good grades. And your ultimate degree, your highest degree, is really the only degree that matters. So if you go to a local school, do well, get excellent grades, win honors, and so on, there's no question that you can't upgrade at the next level to pursue your graduate studies at a better school. And what you do in the beginning is really not that significant. Now, it's significant for some reasons. It's significant just for motivation, just for morale. It's significant. It's significant for culture and so on. But it's not the end all. It's not the final or most important factor in success and happiness. So I don't put pressure on my kids with college admission. I let them get started easy. 3 of my kids started at a local college here, UNC Charlotte. All did well. My 4th child is starting at a local community college, just getting her first courses going before she goes to the same school. They can go there, win awards, get great grades, and they'll be in position to pursue whatever they want at the next level. but I don't put that pressure on them. Now, at the same time, if I had a child who came into my office and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm 15 years old. I want to go to Princeton. What do I need to do?" I would be willing to lay out that plan for him and coach him through it. But that really lies with the child. It's the child's choice to do that, and as a parent, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. I would never be upset with my children because they didn't have extremely high goals for education or even employment and future occupations when they were 17 years old. There's a lot more to consider. I don't want my kids depressed. I don't want my kids developing bad habits because they're stressed and things like that. I want my kids to be in sound mental health, happy, enjoying good relations, and so on. And those things take real care. Those are my priorities. As long as we have that foundation and they're able to build their adult lives with good spirits, maintaining good relationships and things like that, I'm content to be patient and help them cultivate those vocations. So that's how I handle my kids. But at the same time, when I have students who come to me seeking higher goals, I'm certainly happy to help them pursue them. But I also encourage them to realize that if you pursue this and don't achieve your goal on the first shot, you just regroup, figure out what caused you to not succeed on that first try, fix those things, and try again. So it's this persevering spirit that's got to be cultivated, and ultimately what it comes down to is at some point you're going to have to move on beyond this shallow, sort of ignorant talk about getting a job or getting into college, and you're going to have to start dealing with the real substantial skills and the real knowledge that is required for success in the competitive, complicated, high-tech, constantly changing real-world environment. You've got to come to grips with the difficulty of achieving things in a competitive society. And until that happens, the kids are just not ready to pursue success. Now, when they come to that conclusion where they realize that they want to be successful and they understand what's difficult about succeeding, that's when they'll begin to appreciate these sorts of studies, classical Catholic studies, because it's real life. You've got to take care of your soul. You've got to be virtuous. You've got to have discipline. You've got to have grace. You've got to be strong. You've got to have hope. You've got to be able to persevere. You've got to be able to get up after you've failed to do something. You've got to be able to deal with the reality that someone else is better than you at present, and you've got to get back to work to try and improve yourself. It's 90% a matter of spiritual and moral discipline, and 10% actual talent or expertise. It really is a battle. I think it really is a battle of perseverance. And when we talk about something like survival of the fittest, it's really a test of who's going to endure, who's going to persevere through the ups and downs of life, through the real world challenges of life, who's going to have a sustainable plan for how to live and accomplish these things, because many people are going to rise and shine like a flare for a moment and then die out and disappear. And ultimately it's like the fable of the tortoise and the hare. The hare can fly all over the place, but it doesn't finish the race. And the tortoise actually finishes the race. So there's got to be long-term goals. There's got to be patience. There's got to be perseverance in continuing to work, continuing to make progress, not being discouraged or frustrated by the apparent success of others, not thinking that opportunities are lost, not thinking there's only one way to get something done, and if I haven't done that, well then that's it, I'm finished. It's really a challenge of personal perseverance and discipline to keep working until the goal is achieved. And that's where classical Catholic studies, classical liberal arts studies, ancient philosophical studies, Catholic theological studies, and so on, really can help a student. So it's a matter of seeking success rather than admission. That would be my answer for why students should seek classical Catholic studies. That would be my real answer for why parents should try to inspire their children to desire and pursue classical Catholic studies, and why they should provide for them. Like I said before, I wouldn't get into this nonsense, homeschool conference talk and all this classical education hot air that's passed around. It's all this hypocritical, shallow, wishy-washy talk about, living in a G.K. Chesterton distributist universe where, men wear bow ties and smoke cigars. That's just childish nonsense. We need to stop all the silly talk. That's not the world we live in. That's not how things work. The work that we have to do is challenging and complicated. We have to stop with the conspiracy theories, stop with all the hypothetical situations, and just deal with the circumstances that are before us. That's real virtue. So that would be my answer as to why students should pursue classical Catholic studies, because what's going to be necessary for success and longevity and perseverance, it's really going to come down to wisdom and virtue and creativity, resourcefulness, and so on. And the education that would prepare you for admission is an education that produces appearances. And if you want the real thing, if you want real success, you're going to have to go beyond that and seek the real learning, the real wisdom, the real arts and sciences. And they only come through classical Catholic studies. So that's what should motivate students to study the 7 liberal arts, classical philosophy, Catholic theology. Not the thought of admission, but the thought of success. I hope that's helpful. God bless.